Good morning, Canada. Good morning, US. Good evening, Kyiv, Ivano-Frankivsk, Lviv, Poltava, and Kharkiv. Good afternoon, London. We already having a 5 o'clock tea. I'm Oleksii Bobrovnykov, Marek Suprun, and Stefan Bandera with me here. We're doing our, I cannot even say it's a early night, early morning, midday, whatsoever, Friday show. We're talking Ukraine. We're talking China, of course, today. And this is on top of the list, on top of the agenda would be, of course, this Chinese endeavor, both by Beijing and Moscow, and that's a very interesting thing to discuss. That's one thing. We'll probably start with that, and later on we'll have a activist, Sofia Kyivska, who's now in Belgium, and who would help us to see how Ukrainians organize this flash mob on the anniversary of a full-scale Russian invasion. And we have a top guest today too. This is Ahmed Zakayev, the leader of Chechen opposition to Ramzan Kadyrov and Putin cronies back in Johar, the city of Johar, which is still called Grozny by the Russians, and the actual prime minister in exile of the already recognized Republic of Ichkeria, recognized at this stage by two countries. This is Ukraine, and it was Georgia too. Georgia has recognized Ichkeria back in 1992 when the then president Zurab Gamsakhourdia did it. Actually, it's not on the table now for the Georgian government, but de jure it happened. And later on, we'll have Tbilisi on air tonight, today, this morning. So good morning, gentlemen, and Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава.
So let's start with China thing, I assume. Yeah, we got this peace deal, so to say, that was brought to us this early morning. I read it at 6 o'clock a.m. I read it thoroughly. In a sec, I will ask our producer, our muscle behind the scene, to show us this draft. But yeah, I think let's start with that, and then we'll slowly move on to our different topics. Stefko, maybe let's start with you. As when I read it, it was a thing that was definitely part of Moscow agenda. It was definitely an attempt to put NATO off the table for Ukraine, and this was the main, I think, issue with this thing. But this is my assumption. This is my idea. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, gentlemen.
We don't hear you.
We don't hear you. Скажи, щоб Стевко включив звук.
What, Stefko, we cannot hear you. You were just here a second ago, and then something happened with your earplugs, I think. Well, Marek, so maybe you start, and then we try to fix it with
Stefko. Sure. It's interesting that you bring up the notion of the blocks. That's one of the things that concerned me most too, is this notion of the way it was written, that it seems to me that China has a bit of a fear of the EU, and not just NATO. I think that they are projecting their fear that they are going to be left out. I think that they've not. I think it shows that their diplomatic initiatives are not what they think they could be. And part of me wonders if that's not because they're losing, or that they're behaving sort of in the same way that Russia does, where it's a lot of their projection is based on an image that doesn't necessarily represent the reality. We see some of the same talking points, of course, the abandoning the Cold War mentality. That's been in the Russian disinformation ecosystem almost from even before the full-scale invasion on February 24th, 2022. So that I sort of toss aside as just to sort of trying to amplify what the Russians have been pushing for a very long time. My fear is that I don't think I hope that Western diplomats see that there is that they can read between the lines, because they do talk about a sustainable European security architecture, which is probably a dig to NATO, like you said. I know that the French have for always been pushing this idea of a European continental army. It's never gotten any traction. It seems to be a distraction, and so I don't think it's going to be taken with any seriousness. My question would be, I think, to add to the question, is that are we seeing the creation? See, this all reads like a grievance, and when I thought about that it reads like a grievance, again, it reminded me. I think we talked about this last time. That this is the triangle that Zbigniew Brzezinski warned about: Russia, China, and Iran. And it's not so much that they're going to be ideologically aligned, but that they're going to be aligned because of their grievances. And the interesting thing is that these grievances seem to be fueled by disinformation. Stefko, what's your take on it?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Well, if you look at the 12 points that are in the peace plan, or the peace proposal, or peace principles, or whatever you want to call it, I think two out of the 12 are in Ukraine's favor. The other ones are basically in Russia's favor. And I mean, the very first point out of the 12 points about respecting the sovereignty of all nations makes a point about all countries, big or small. So out of the 12 points, you can kind of argue that point is Ukraine's favor. Abandoning the Cold War mentality, that's rhetoric China's been using from like the second day of the war. Ceasing hostilities plays into what Putin wants right now: resuming peace talks, resolving the humanitarian crisis, protecting civilians and POWs, keeping nuclear plants safe. The only other point, in addition to the first one about big or small, would be the reduction of strategic risks about nuclear weapons must not be used and nuclear wars must not be fought. So out of those 12 points, I think that two are kind of acknowledging Ukraine's needs and wants. The other 10 are either, kind of sitting on the fence or in Russia's favor. So, I mean, China has its own game it's playing. I think it'll be obvious when we see a video that I prepared a little bit later about what the Chinese official Communist Party organs are saying, and what the Europeans are responding. But all in all, it's I would say the Chinese peace proposal is pretty weak and not in favor of Ukraine.
I will get back to that in just a few minutes with Zakayev when Ahmed is with us. And now just a little, not a destruction, but basically to show the fragrance, I would say, the smell of how the Ukrainian actionism, I would say, the Ukrainian political action is developing on the streets of Europe and elsewhere. We got a person right now on the streets in Belgium, and this is Sofia Kyivska, who's one of the bloggers who's there, right there on the spot. Sofia, good evening. Great to have you. Thank you for joining us. What do you see? What actually happens? Just tell us what you see and what actually happens, and where are you right now? Because you travel a lot, I know that, and so you can be anywhere in that part of the world, right?
Good evening, bonjour à tous. Right now I'm in France, à Cannes. So now we have meeting of our people, of our refugees, and right now I have to tell you that in small city on the south of France, 2,000 of Ukrainians during the war, and the whole city is not big, it's just 70,000 all citizens. And also I have to say that France, there are over 120,000 people come to France, and now you can see over me the people who has it, the young artist who will perform today, and at the end of this evening, at the end of this will be light show, light performance, but it will be later because now it's not dark yet, and the head of this performance is actress and famous singer of our Ukrainian drama theater of Ivan Franko, Victoria Vassalati, and unfortunately, but not unfortunately, we are happy with this. We don't have a mayor of the city now here because the mayor of the city now in Ukraine, he came to Lviv a few days ago. He was in Kyiv and have a meeting in parliament with the Yermak, and also the head, the president of the local association, Ideas Sans Frontiers, Ideas Without Borders, also in Ukraine. She helped. She support the mayor of the city, and the mayor of the city is the president of association of of all France. So now they had agreement with Andriy Sadovy, with Lviv, and that's why right now David Lisnar in Lviv in the meeting with Andriy Sadovy support Ukrainians in Ukraine, and we here make the meeting as a lot of cities of France right now. I think over
Sophia,
20 cities.
Hold on a sec. Hold on a sec. Great, but this absolutely great. I mean, you got a huge crowd there. So this is a very small city, somewhere on the French coast, the Riviera, I assume. And there are 2,000 people over there, and you got the same happening all over France, as I assume, right? So this is something that is happening right now in all the more or less significant cities and towns in that part of the world. Am I correct? So this is a pretty global gathering for France and for the European Union.
Each city has its own gathering. Our closest cities, Nice, own gathering. Antibes has own gathering. That's why we are not. You cannot see here a big crowd, but people come and people continue to come in because today was working day and people just come back to the center of the city to join us. And also we expecting a very beautiful show of children because here we launch Ukrainian school for Ukrainian children. It's a school which Saturday, so it's Saturday school, but children can come, can speak Ukrainian, can learn Ukrainian language, and can learn math and other subjects that really I think that Ukrainian school is much more high level than all European schools, and also they perform, they learn how to act, how to think, and today we will
Thank you. Just
we will
one
have
thing.
a
Just
very
one
great
more thing,
show
Sophia.
from children.
A very last one, because we're actually we will have another guest in a few seconds. But very last one. So the mayor of your city is now in Lviv talking to Andrei Sadovy, the mayor of Lviv, and but they are talking humanitarian aid. They are talking conditions on which the Ukrainian refugees are staying back in the southern France. What is exactly that the mayor of this town is doing in Ukraine right now? This is the last one.
It's his second visit of Ukraine. The first visit of Ukraine was in March 2022 when the war just began. The first what he do, he go to Ukraine and visit three districts. Lviv, Ivano-Frankivsk, Ternopil, and right now it's the second visit. And during this period, he do really many things for Ukrainians here in France. So there is a house of Ukrainians here in Cannes, and there is also the square which named by Taras Grigorovich Shevchenko, also opened in Cannes.
That's amazing. I thank you so much, and try to have fun during this terrible day of anniversary. I collect as much evidence of what our people are doing there, as much quotes as possible. We'll come back to this conversation later. If for the few interviews our people there on plan to come back. How do they see themselves in France, and what do they plan to do this year, the second year of war? That would be most beneficial, and we'll come back to this conversation when this thing is over. Thanks a lot. That was Sofia Kyivska. She is an activist, a blogger, and she's now in France, and she is basically traveling between Belgium and France, and she's contributing to Ukrainian media network. Thank you, Sofia. Great having you. And Ahmed is actually already here, and that's great because we got the Prime Minister of Ichkeria on air. And in just a second, Ahmed Zakayev will join us. Yeah, now Ahmed is here. Ahmed, you already know Marek Suprun, and I'm happily introducing to you to our co-anchor and one of the leaders of our project. This is Stefan Bandera, a journalist from Canada, Winnipeg right now. His name is not coincidental. Actually, he's the grandson of Stepan Bandera, the Ukrainian. So he's not only a journalist, but also a basically a living a living symbol, a living legacy, walking on 2 feet.
Pleasure to meet you, sir.
It's good to meet you again. It's good to see you again.
Nice to meet you too. Yeah.
Ahmed, one brief one from me, and I will give the floor to Marek and Stefko. Yesterday, 23rd of February, the day that is not really known to many of the Ukrainians. It was not until maybe last year, but many still do not understand what it is. It took Ukrainians decades maybe to realize what is 18th of May, the same year. We're talking about the same, the event of the same scale, of the same drama that was happening in 1944 when Stalin regime, when Russia was deporting and killing massively Chechens in the Russian occupied territories. And yesterday you commemorated this day. I wanted to ask what was the reaction of the European leadership. You are in Europe right now, and you have a lot of consultations and talks with officials in EU. were they actually responsive and I would say how were they addressing this day of memory and grievance, which was yesterday, 23rd of February?
Yes, thank you very much. 23rd February 1944 is a tragic day for Chechen and English people. It's a day of genocide our nation. That time we lost half of our nation, half of people, Chechens and English. And what happened last year in Ukraine, it's also started, and what's going on now this time in Ukraine, it's not started 1 year ago. Russia started do war crimes against Chechen nation and other nations. It started long time ago. It started 1994 Chechen Republic invasion, and we that time lost 300,000 Chechen civilians. Only Chechen civilians, 300,000. 42,000 of them children. And what's going on now in Ukraine? Of course, I'm happy to international community started to finally understood who is Mr. Putin and started to things what they have to do 20 years ago. And this time, I hope the international community, European politicians and Western world politicians do right things, and we will stop together this crime, what he's doing in Ukraine. And I hope the people who committed this crime will be taken to responsible what they have done in Chechnya and what they are doing in now this time in Ukraine. And our discussions with our politicians and other, exactly European Parliament. You remember 2004, European Parliament recognized day of 23rd of February and our deportation as a genocide of Chechen English people. It's a very good basic for international tribunal to take people or this regime to answer what they have done with Chechens, with English people and other peoples at that time.
I will just briefly ask our studio. There's a very short fragment of video footage that we could watch together. It's like up to 2 minutes maybe, but let's just watch what we have. Влада, покажи, будь ласка, відео чеченське. I'm talking to Ukrainian, to our editor and our producer, so we could watch it together just a couple of minutes. Crimean Tatars did this video, including some footage that they filmed nowadays, just using some of the data that is legit, that is official. What surprised me, Ahmed and Stefko and Marco, what surprised me is that you would not really get a lot of content in English, either from the media like Current Time or Radio Liberty or other media outlets that are funded by U.S. government. You would still not get a lot. And what surprised me also was that when I was looking for a little fragment for our podcast tonight, that was the only one that I found that would be available with English subtitles or with some English data. The stuff that was in Russian, even produced by American outlets, were, well, I would not say that it was completely filled with Russian propaganda, but it was always starting with the narrative that the Chechens would be a part of Hitler coalition. So it started with this notion, and then it moved to Russian atrocities. But somehow this idea was, they were trying to justify the NKVD operation. And these were Russians who were producing these videos. And that struck me because it was always a manipulation, and it was always some sort of a Russian propaganda flavor in it. I'd start with Stefko and with Marco, who are working on Northern American continent, and we're working there for decades. On one hand, we do not have any coverage of Chechen genocide, Russian genocide of Chechnya, of Ingushetia, of Ichkeria, as we call it now. On the other hand, we got this quote-unquote gentleman yesterday who was a part of Russian propaganda machine, who became a part of Radio Liberty team in Washington, D.C., which was an absolutely, I don't know, I cannot find words for that. So how come this issue, Chechen issue, the issue of the genocide against Chechens, the issue of atrocities that Russia has performed in Chechnya in the 90s, is not covered at all. We know Inna Kurochkina and Andrei Kurochkin, a beautiful bloggers and a couple who live in Prague now and who are actual representative of Ichkerian government in exile. They do a lot, but they do a lot on a very, very personal level, and that's probably the only content that you could get on YouTube on that. That's it. That's where it stops. So question to my colleagues here, Marco and Stefko, we'll maybe have a couple of minutes on that with Ahmed as well, and then we move to more global agenda, including China and stuff.
Well, I mean, on that issue, I think it's a matter of sheer numbers. That the fact that, let's say, compared to what the Ukrainian diaspora was able to do was, well, first of all, there was a history of diaspora, and by sheer numbers, the Ukrainians were able to organize and make people more aware about the genocides of the Ukrainian people, but at the same time, that's a bit of a shortcoming of what the Ukrainian diaspora should have or could have been doing, and that is talking about the other genocides. It's telling to me that video was made by the Crimean Tatars. The Crimean Tatars have also been neglected, I would say, by the Ukrainian state in many ways in the early years of independence. Now in the diaspora, Ukrainians and Tatars are speaking and working together more. As an aside, the genocides, and this perhaps is one way to remind the Americans, especially in the American context, that those deportations, those genocides were enabled, in fact, by the United States, by the Lend-Lease program of the Second World War, when Stalin used all that equipment and resources, including things like trucks, to do the actual deportations. So I think the way to get into the hearts, to get to the hearts of the American public, would also to point out these moments of historical injustice or historical irony, and show them, hey, you guys enabled this genocide unknowingly, unwittingly, and that's the way you have to talk to Canadians, Americans. You have to make the story part of their story. That's what I would say.
Mr. Zakayev, thanks for joining us again. It's great to see you. I'm sorry we never got a chance to meet in person, but I do anticipate returning, and I look forward to doing an interview with you to get to know you a little better in London. My question is the following. When you meet with your European colleagues, heads of state, at your level, do you think they understand the strategic importance that the Chechen Republic of Ichkeria represents? And by that, I mean where it's geographically situated. We have been talking for a while about the nightmare scenario that Zbigniew Brzezinski spoke about, the triangle between Russia, Tehran, Iran, and China. And the corridor that Stefko spoke about runs from Moscow to Tehran, and on the way, there's Chechnya, there's your country. That, to me, is interesting. If the leaders of Europe, your level, do they understand that by recognizing and acting in the interests of the exiled government, that they would be significantly hurting Russia's attempt to recreate that corridor and destabilize the region?
Okay, thank you very much, and I hope so we will meet in London when I will back to London too. Thank you very much for questions. I would like to explain you and others who listening to us. Chechen issue, all times Russian propaganda before they started to kill Chechens and other Caucasian people, they linked us with international issues, with international problems. During the Second World War, Stalin accused Chechen and English people collaborating with Nazis, fascism, with fascism. Even those the Nazis never have been in our territory, in Chechnya or in Ingushetia. Anyway, it's that time when international community had a problem with Nazis and with fascism. It was convenient to suit both sides. And second genocide, it was linked to first genocide, 1944, when we were deported. We were deported in our motherland. And second, in 1994, when they started to war against Chechen nation, they did the same thing. They linked our issue with international Islamic terrorists. Because of that time, it was problem for Western world. It was understandable for them, and it was to give them to opportunity to keep eyes there, our tragedy. And Russians did whatever they want to do. This time, things changed when they started war against Ukrainian people. And I hope, and I see it with our conversation with other European politicians, Western politicians, they understood now, and they have answer who is Mr. Putin and what is it Russia empire. They never was changed. In when USSR collapsed, international community think it's over and Russia will become a democratic and state. But it wasn't true. They have the same imperial politicians, and they show it to international community when they started war against Chechens in 1994. Anyway, everyone keeps silence, and they think if they close eyes for tragedy, Chechen tragedy, it will be enough to Russia to stop after that. It never will happen. In this time, the same thing. If they will not stop in Ukraine, Russians will go too further, and European countries will involve this war. In this reason, I think we have all our chance to have opportunity to take responsible Russians and for answer for what they have done in not only Chechens, Ukrainians, Georgian, Azerbaijan, English people. It's a lot of nations who become victims of this empire, and I hope it's finally will be stopped. And this time it was good time for everybody to unite our powers, political powers, military powers, to punish this Russia empire, Russia aggression state. And this time I think it will be happen.
Before Stefko steps in, Marek's question was absolutely great. And Marco, I appreciate that you popped up with this one. This is amazing. I was kind of thinking of it, but you made it articulate and sharp as an arrow. So Marco's question also was about this corridor through Ichkeria to Tehran, where according to Brzezinski and according to, well, quite a few analysts, there is a potential for this new route and this new Axis powers that may create a new way of communicating with each other. But there's a Chechnya on their way. There is Ichkeria on their way. So I wouldn't repeat Marek's question. Maybe he did it the way he did it. That was a great question. But I just wanted you to focus on that a little bit, if I may.
Okay, I understood. What is the question? Why and what happened? And I think what Brzezinski said about Chechen tragedy, and he compared us with other tragedy which happened in this time and our centuries. I think it's a little bit complicated for me to have this correct answer, because we have a new area and new politicians and new politics in international community. If I started to accuse Western politicians and others for what happened before with us, it will be not correct for this time. I would like to be more carefully about these matters and these issues. Andrei, Alexander.
Stefko.
Stefko, yeah.
Hi. If I may, I thank you, Mr. Zakayev, for tying in the history to the present day. And I have a question about the present day, if I may, and it has to do with the monster called Kadyrov. And when I watched the Putin's address to the Federal Assembly, he was not there. In the past, whenever I watched Russian Putin speeches, the cameraman would always show a lot of this Kadyrov guy, and he was not there. And he is also making some pronouncements about France and their failure to help during the genocide. And I'm trying to understand his game, this monster's game, Kadyrov. What is he doing, and what does the West need to know about this guy called Kadyrov, and what is the game that he is playing now?
Kadyrov is not independent figure to talk about him as a independent politician, and he make his own policy about anything. He is Putin's puppet, and we know it. Putin's created this monster, not only for Chechens, for other Caucasian people. And we will have answer who is Mr. Kadyrov or who is Mr. Putin and what happened to them. If we will see if regime in Russians, in Kremlin regimes will be changed, the same situation will be changed in Chechen Republic. Before that, it's nothing will happen. It's Putin's creation, and he will do things whatever until Putin will stay on his position.
But Stefko's question was, and I haven't noticed that, and Bandera's noticed that. I was actually not really watching closely this Putin's address, but when we saw Putin talking to his people in Moscow this week, we saw all this bunch of old-fashioned cronies of his, including Volodin, Medvedev, and Medvedev did this absolutely crazy statement this morning, which is actually important to quote for a little sec, because that's the thing that actually shows the scale of Russian ambition and the scale of Russian madness. When Medvedev was actually saying that, quote unquote, it's a year now when our military are returning peace and order on our land. So basically, again, Russians called Ukraine a part of Russia, which is of course nonsense. But what we were trying to ask is that with this bunch of Kremlin's of Putin's friends, we couldn't trace Kadyrov there. Am I right, Stefko? So Kadyrov was not there. He was not spotted by the. Is it of any significance, or he is just sick, or whatsoever? It's or he's somehow out of favor of Mr. Putin, or it's just a coincidence that there's really nothing to talk about, whether he's present in Kremlin or not. How do you see his role right now? We've heard rumors of his declining health and whatsoever, but are these just rumors?
No, nothing happened. It's the same thing. He was just sick, and he wasn't capable to come to and sit with them. It's nothing more. Absolutely. Okay. Roger that. Yeah.
The Chechen. Go ahead. I was just going to say that the Ukrainian people, in theory, we should have we have a good understanding of Kavkaz, thanks to Taras Shevchenko's poem about Kavkaz, that kind of encapsulates the spirit, I would say, of the English and the Chechen people, and they're striving for the Chechen Republic of Ichkeria, and we also feel, Ukrainians feel, you have those Kadyrovites, but there are Chechens that are fighting on Ukraine's side, of course, defending Ukraine. And I'm wondering if that is something that needs to be talked about more. Should the English language world know about the Chechens fighting on for Ukraine?
Yeah, I think that will be easy to me to explain it in Russian. I think all of you speaks in Russian.
No, but in this case, I will try to translate maybe then, because we do it for the English language audience right now. But now let me step in as a translator, and I will do my best. I'm not a professional translator, but I will do my best to translate it.
Thank you.
If you could speak in short sentences, like in short paragraphs, and give me time to translate. That's how we can handle this.
So we have a very bad connection here. Very bad connection. Hello, do you hear me?
I hear you all right. I hear you perfectly.
Okay, хорошо. Thank you. вот то, что происходит сейчас на Кавказе, и то, что народы, которые находились и находятся в колониальной зависимости от России, они сегодня воюют против Украины. Почему?
Now, I got to explain that these peoples, the nations that are still under the colonial influence of Russia, they in the Caucasus, many of them are fighting against Ukraine now, and I got to explain why.
Несколько столетий эти народы находились под российской оккупацией. Практически произошла очень серьезная ассимиляция этих народов.
So for a few centuries they were under Russian rule and they were assimilated by the Russian Empire.
И только чеченцы и ингуши — это, наверное, единственные на Кавказе из народов, которые менее были ассимилированы, и они продолжали бороться за свою свободу и за независимость все эти 200-300 лет.
And these were only Chechens and Ingush among the old northern Caucasian people that were peoples this time, that were not assimilated and kept on fighting with Russia for centuries, for 2 centuries or 3 centuries up till now.
Но сегодня я могу говорить только о чеченцах, о ингушах, о войнахах, которые реально, даже только о чеченцах, которые реально 30 лет, 35 лет назад, используя сложившуюся ситуацию в СССР, попытались очередной раз отстоять свою свободу и независимость.
But now I can only speak on behalf of Chechens and Ingush and Vainachs partially, who for the last 30 years were fighting for their independence against Russia and Soviet regime.
И для других народов, которые наблюдали за тем, что происходит с нами, с чеченцами, конечно, это был очень плохой урок для них, вернее, плохой показатель.
So for other nations who were watching us, Chechens and Ingush, fighting with Russia, I would try to translate it. It was a tough lesson, Marco says. Yeah,
absolutely bad lesson. Yeah. Несмотря на то, что Организация Объединенных Наций, практически все международные институты декларировали о праве свободы народов на право на самоопределение, на свободу и независимость. Но когда чеченцы воспользовались этим универсальным правом, нас весь мир предал. И мы были практически доведены до грани уничтожения всей нации и всего народа. 300 тысяч только гражданского населения, которые погибли в этот период.
So although UN was declaring a right to every nation for its self-governance and its self-determination, we, the Chechens, were put at the brink of basically, how would you say, at the brink of total extinction in this destruction, in this 30-year war, where we lost 300,000 people both in military and civilians, mostly.
И кавказские народы, которые наблюдали за всем этим, просто уже напрочь отказались от даже помыслов быть свободными и независимыми.
And so other nations of the Northern Caucasus who were watching all this and learning this tough lesson, they basically had to put aside the aspiration and the desire to become independent, watching and learning this tough lesson from us.
А для России они являются просто пушечным мясом. И, конечно, они их сегодня использовали в войне против Украины. И не только их, но даже те территории, которые подпадают под российскую оккупацию, они начинают рекрутировать уже самих украинских граждан в войне против украинцев. Это, в принципе, это природа любой империи и любой экспансии против других народов и национальностей.
What is the cannon meat in English, Marco? How would you say this?
Cannon fodder.
Yeah. Yeah, so basically that's the name, unfortunately, for those nations that were used by the Russia and that were assimilated, that were controlled and are still controlled by the Russians, who are used by Russia to fight and to wage its war on Ukraine, and that Russia is using now on the Ukrainian front line.
Поэтому нам нужно сегодня исходить из того, что до тех пор, пока мир будет поддерживать Россию как империю, все эти народы самостоятельно не смогут выйти из этой колониальной зависимости. Но сегодня на самом деле есть реальный шанс, потому что сегодня в повестке, международной повестке, не как жить с Россией, а как жить после России. И эти народности, они сегодня думают о том, какую перспективу и какое будущее им строят. И это очень важно, и это, я считаю, очень большое достижение.
So now, until the world, the civilized world, is still treating Russia as an empire and treating Russia as an empire that has a right to do what it does, these nations does not have a chance for a self-determination and for their own path. But luckily these days we see a different world that is now thinking of how to live in the post-Russia world, how to live in a world where there's no Russia. And so this may give a chance to these nations to establish themselves.
Мы сегодня, как нация и как государство, которые, в принципе, стоят на независимости, мы должны инициировать процессы на Кавказе с тем, чтобы эти народы начали выходить от колониальной зависимости. И это будет решение всей проблемы. И это будет, если нам это удастся, разрушить ту страну, ту империю, которую мы знаем до сегодняшнего дня, или которая существовала до 24 февраля 22 года, вот это будет победа и украинцев, и всего цивилизованного мира. Вот к этому мы и должны прийти.
So we got to destroy this empire that existed until 24th of February last year, and this is the only path that we could take to give these nations a chance. I'm sorry, my translation is far from flawless, but I hope that like
Very
basically we got it. Thank you.
Mr. Zakayev, if I could ask one more question. I understand that the genocide that Russia did to Caucasian people, to Chechens in particular, was used to sort of instill more fear in the other, in your neighbors in the surrounding area. Do you think, though, that it would be possible now to create a Kavkaz Federation so that you can unite the people of the entire Kavkaz, or a confederation that would be a wedge in the Russian Empire and really bring an end, help bring about the end of that Russian Empire?
My answer will be very short. Yes, I'm 100% sure it will be happen, and we will make it, inshallah. We'll do that.
Inshallah.
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 That's amazing. That's a great conversation, gentlemen. I'm absolutely, we were having it. And Marco, I just want to say again, thank you for your wonderful questions. And we are having a chance of now Ahmed Zakayev is interviewed by Marek Suprun, and we got Stefan Bandera on air. And I just want to recall you that we're UMN, Ukrainian Media Network, and we try to do what others do not do. We try to cover the events in Ukraine in both Ukrainian and English. And we try to talk to the witnesses and not to the experts. We try to talk to the participants and to actors on the geopolitical field, rather than the self-proclaimed, experts and connoisseurs of this agenda. So this is what we're trying to do, and we ask for support from our audience. We ask for support from from people from around the globe, and so for that, our studio would help us to show the QR codes for both PayPal and Patreon and this type of ways this means to support Ukrainian media network and all of us doing our job. Yeah, thank you for that. I'm returning the floor to Marko and Stefko. Thank you, gentlemen, for doing it, and we have a great conversation. We still have some time to focus on these issues.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.
Salam alaikum. And I think there we go.
That was a great conversation. Oleksii, are we going to Iceland at all today?
This is the thing. Thank you for that. I do not get those messages from. Yes, we are doing it, because I was not getting messages from our studio. But yes, also, apart from my asking for donations and living on Patreon and PayPal donations from our audience, we place ads here, and this is one of them. And so I suggest that you guys, where you have a chance to take a break from all this geopolitical turmoil happening around the globe, you got a chance to watch the Northern Lights and to walk down those insanely beautiful black sand beaches in Iceland. You can do it having a English-speaking and a Ukrainian-speaking tour guide back there. And for that, we got these contacts, and now we're going to show them again. And they're also in the description for this broadcast. You can get them from there too. Great. So we had Ahmed Zakayev, and hopefully Marko would get a chance to meet him in either in London or in Kiev, because this is not a secret. And Ahmed is a frequenter in Kiev right now, and he's developing his own small but rather I would say robust regiment of his people, of Ichkerians, independent Ichkerians in Ukraine. He's organizing this battalion, this regiment. So he's a frequenter in Kiev, and last time he was in our Ukrainian media, in our UMN studio in Kiev. So hopefully we'll meet there at some stage, or yeah, you'll see him in London.
Awesome.
But we got a bunch of other things to discuss before Georgia's join us, and we got a couple of files from Marko with this UN vote this week, and I would ask Suprun to comment on what was actually happening in UN headquarters this week, because this is significant. And in the meantime, our studio would help us with the pictures.
Well, we had the, I think what I would call the success of Ukraine's diplomatic front with the vote in the United Nations to recognize the resolution for Russia to basically get out of Ukraine. 100 and, I'm going to mess this up, over 130, I think it was, not as many, only, well, there you go, 141 in favor of the resolution that the General Assembly adopted. I think that's a real testament, and this is a great visualization, because when you see a list of countries, it really doesn't mean much. But when you see the basically 3/4, is that about 3/4 of the world of the world's countries are supporting, over 3/4 are supporting Ukraine, it's very significant in my opinion. I brought that up because I think that our diplomats don't get the credit they deserve, because even when in the conversation with Mr. Zakayev, Chechnya tried to go it alone, and that's understandable. And the drive toward independence is an inalienable right, I would argue. And it does show, though, that you need support. And one of the things Ukraine has been successful at is creating that unity in Europe or in the United States, and even in South America. I remember just a few months ago how people were very convinced that South America would be supporting Russian resolutions in the United Nations. Now, I know it's political and it's a resolution, and perhaps the real question lies in whether or not they're trying to if these countries, some of them are trying to get around sanctions, and it's something we can dissect. But it still is a testament to the diplomatic effort. And that's really significant, because one of the things you need is unity. And that's one of the things that Russian disinformation always tries to target, is the unity of the united, well, the unity of the United Front. I don't know if I can be any more tautological, but they try to hit a united front, and they'll look at any small creeks to wedge their way in there. So, it's really important to acknowledge the diplomats and what they do. And I think that we are on, as Biden would say, an inflection point. I think we're looking at a turnaround. I don't know, Stefko, what do you think?
Well, if I may take a little bit more of a cynical viewpoint on the UN, just to point out that we had a vote back in July, there was a vote back in March, more or less the same way, and the Ukrainian diplomats, you're right, are doing a great job, but these votes are and their huge symbolic value of it. But yesterday, when the UN Twitter was saying, kind of taking credit for this great result, and then they had a tweet about can the UN stop a war, and then it has 5 things the UN can do, and then you click on that and you realize it's clickbait, because what it spells out is that the UN can do a lot except stop a war.
Right.
So the answer is no. The UN cannot stop a war when a bad faith actor with nuclear weapons decides that it can do whatever the F it wants in its neighborhood. And and then to make a draw or end on a positive note, you would hope that this whole affair will end with the UN kind of either being reformed, or maybe Russia being kicked out, or at least from the Security Council. But for the UN to be actually more than symbolic, then that's another, I think, piece of Vina after the war will be a task.
See, it's an interesting thing you bring up, because this was the General Assembly, right? And it's striking me the difference between the General Assembly and the Security Council is really significant, because I always go back to 1990 when Iraq invaded Kuwait. And the resolution from the Security Council was basically 2 paragraphs, and it was get the hell out or face your demise. And it took them from about 8 months, I think, from when Iraq invaded Kuwait. And I mean, the cynical response the cynical thought back then was that this is all being done to save a quarter on a gallon of gas. More research has been done, and apparently there was some sort of commitment in the White House, in any event that I read, that there was a commitment on the leadership back then to maintaining the rules-based order. And you're absolutely right that the difference between then and now is that Russia was weak, the USSR was crumbling. They were probably willing to do anything to save their own skin, but they couldn't stop the inevitable processes that were unleashed. Having said that, the issue is, you're absolutely right. There needs to be a reform within the UN, at least in the Security Council, which would see for them to lose their veto power, because that would be a symbol that, they still suffer from that the great powers, right? The great Velikaya Rus, the great Russia. And that is a really old construct from the 19th century. And I think that the Security Council needs to be reformed and understand that Just because you have a nuclear saber doesn't make you great. All nations should be equal, and not some more equal than others.
And the other good thing about those votes, it kind of shows you, where Russia is working, where Moscow has levers. And, for me still, China, whatever, China is playing in its own league as far as it's concerned. It's above everybody, but India hasn't sided with Ukraine in any of the votes. They've abstained, right? So that's the other lesson. And then you see the efforts, and I mean, this is outside of the context of just of Ukraine, but how the it's being played as a global South versus the global North, right? Again, another camp, another kind of a point that China is I think strategically playing in terms of the global South against the the white guys fighting there in Europe. It's white people, white men killing each other. Who cares?
Yeah, well, that's the hypocrisy.
Take a look at the map again, because we're talking this map, and this is a great map indeed. And thank you both for commenting on this, because it's really evident that indeed the tentacles of Russian Empire are getting weaker and weaker, and we see it on this map. I'll just ask our studio to put it back on screen again for a sec. Yeah, so we could expect some. Which I think it's Stefko who said that. So we could expect the South America would perform in a different way, but no, it's almost all green, right? And this is amazing. We still got South America buying Sputnik, and 2 years ago, and there were a lot of speculations indeed that they could vote differently, but no. And in Africa, we got Algeria, which was always a part of a Russian game against Morocco, for instance. But it's okay. It's absent from the vote, but it's not voting against. And it looks way more healthy.
Yeah, it's a good point that despite pouring in millions, if not billions of dollars into their disinformation machines in South America, they still lost on the diplomatic front, which is good. I mean, that means they lose resources. Clearly, they're not putting them towards modernizing their army. So, I mean, that's a win for Ukraine in any event, for them to keep wasting their resources. But I think it's very significant. And, in fact, President Zelensky mentioned in his press conference that he would like to attend a summit in the Americas, in South America in particular. And I thought that was a really interesting position to be in, a position of leadership, in fact. And I think we're living through a paradigm shift, and it's going to be really, really interesting for the next few years.
In the meantime, we got Tbilisi waiting on a phone with a mic. We got Tbilisi on air, and in a sec, Lana Ghvinjilia will join us. So we talked to Franz in the beginning of this little podcast of ours, and now we got Tbilisi. Hello, Lana. So it was a pretty hot night in Tbilisi today. I'll ask with the one you were marching, of course, because of the 24th of February and the start of the Russian full-scale war. But also there was a political sentiment. Am I right? So you were also marching for the imprisoned Misha Saakashvili. Is that so?
I mean, there was two main ideas behind all of this. What was happening on the Rustaveli on force, for sure. It was support to Ukraine. It was solidarity to Ukraine and demonstration, maybe demonstration of a will and understanding of Georgian people and their support and solidarity towards Ukraine, because you know that Georgian government does not express so much support or make some very serious political mistakes during this war. And as I know, everybody in Ukraine knows there is a bit of significant difference between attitudes of the public and attitudes of Georgian government towards the war and towards Ukraine. We assume this war as our war as well. Ukraine fights with our enemy and a country which occupies Georgia as well. So there was two main political messages there. Support Ukraine and that we are on the right side in this war. Demonstration of that Georgian people is on the right of all civilized world who supports Ukraine now, that we are not on Russia's side, because Georgian government failed to demonstrate this, and it's very clear by now that Georgian government is still under influence. These were two main and it was, a successful demonstration. It was approximately 50, probably, maybe, I don't know exactly, but it was many. And for Georgia, we have a cold weather. It's winter, and so I think it was very and message from Georgian people.
Before Marco would ask a question, and I know he has a bunch of those, I just have to. I wonder.
I'm not sure what's going on.
So before Marek Suprun would ask a question, and I'm sure that both Marco and Stefko has a bunch of those. I just got to remind to our viewers that there's another cold place on Earth where you are most welcomed. And we got this group of we're placing as here at UMN, so we're working as a normal proper media outlet, and so this is the way we survive. We do business, and this is media business as well. So we have to say that we got a partner in Iceland, another cold country, where there's a Ukrainian English-speaking guide that would lead you through all those beautiful, magnificent, and absolutely picturesque locations with the view to the northern lights, etc. And you got a contact here on the bottom of this screen, and you can also get this information in the description of this broadcast. And in the meantime, I'm giving floor to Marco and Stefko, and they got, I assure you, a lot of nasty ones to Georgian government, and in particular in regard of sanctions. But I wouldn't be a spoil sport, so Marco first, and then Stepan.
Actually, I was going to give the floor to Stefko. Okay. He was actually in Georgia to monitor the elections, and I think he has a bit more interesting take on Georgia.
Well, I mean, if I was to sum up the photographs of from Tiflis, would have been my selfies with the Ronald Reagan statue in Tbilisi, which was something that was very dear to me as somebody growing up in Canada in the 1980s. But that is an aside, because I'd like to find out more about what is happening and how Georgia is and the Georgian government is being used to bypass sanctions. And then
Right.
The second question would have to do with what's happening with Mikhail Saakashvili, but maybe we can start with the sanctions first. What's happening? How is it that the Georgian government can, is it just about money? Is it just about greed? Is it just about making money off the war? Like, what's happening?
Hey, may I start answering here?
Yes, please.
Alexei? Yeah. I mean, the situation is very clear. This is a sign to Putin on which side Georgia is. As long as Saakashvili and kept in this, it's a sign of the Georgian government is on their side. And the force which can change their minds, and there is in the courts and European Parliament involved, and all of the messages in different ways that Saakashvili let out of this hospital to Europe properly, because he's very severely injured and he's sick there and he's poisoned. But the only message which our government now gives, this is message to Putin, that actually he is a Putin's, this is a sign to him that our government is on Russia's side.
Do you think that there will
what
be
about,
a change? Go ahead. Well, you get the follow-up. Well, do you think there will be a change in the government's stance towards plugging up the holes for bypassing the sanctions? The EU announced that they're going to be adopting an entirely new packet, and they've even appointed a person to be in charge who's going to be, I'm not sure if he has the title of commissioner, but his job is to visit countries where the EU sees that there are countries that are going around the sanctions regime, and that they are adopting a series of I wouldn't call them new sanctions, but very significant laws that could impact the economy, especially on those whose, as Steph was saying, that whose pocket it would hurt. Will that have any effect?
Sanctions is the only, they will have effect. And actually sanctions and personal sanctions against oligarchs in Georgia is the only way to make him change his mind and let let Mikhail Saakashvili out, maybe, or just make any steps. Because all of the Georgian government and the power which is in power, the political grower now in Georgia, they are in Ivanishvili's money. So very, very scared not to be sanctioned. In their conversation on the high level in the European Union, that he may fall under the personal sanctions, it will have huge political changes in Georgia immediately. Everything is just built on this. This is only guaranteed. They do not have public support. Their power active. They do not have internet support. As soon as Georgian people will see the perspective that there is a real chance to change government, to back democracy, to free political prisoners, and just to back to democracy path we were going during 10 years from 2004 till 2013, everything will go particularly the right way. because you see from the beginning of war in Ukraine, there is a lot of rallies, humanitarian actions. People are collecting, aid to Ukraine, expressing different support to Ukraine. But our government even does not recognize military volunteers who fight as a militaries, and they are that these people may be arrested, and after they will be back to Georgia and so on. So Georgian government expresses absolutely clear messages during the year the Russia side, and Georgia expresses
I got one more for you. I got one more for you, and then Stefko and Marek would also have a couple of questions. We still have about 5 minutes for this discussion, but I know that you're also you know a lot, and you're a part of this strength and unity movement, this anti-occupational movement that friends of ours and brothers of arms of ours, those who fought in Ukraine, and our close friends, and our among the volunteers who fought for Ukrainian on Ukrainian side with the Russians a year ago, you are still monitoring the demarcation line with South Ossetia and Abkhazia, apparently Georgian territories that are under the Russian military boot still. Do you still see the same creeping occupations, creeping annexation? Yeah. Attempts by the Russians? Could you please get us into this? So how do they proceed? Are they still taking over the local territories, like, step by step, a wood after wood, a road after road? So how do they act? Russians, I mean.
Almost nothing changed since the start. There is some at the occupied territory. There was a military change in number of, because part of them had been sent to Ukraine to fight. But actually this policy, it continues. So we have a lot of video and photo proofs that they are moving these barbed wires, and there is a installation a new military post by Russian in the forest. Alexei knows this is Chorchana forest, and especially in Raja. And especially there is a big movement of occupation forces. Of course, we cannot, compare it to Ukraine scale, but small groups on the Kennedy side. So we provide this information to partners, European embassies, and they. But of course, at the same time with the Ukraine, there is a very little reaction, a very little coverage of it, and it is understandable. The process is going, so nothing stopped, even there is some progress. Recorded, and so we also got interest from international media after the war in Ukraine started. About what's going on in Georgia here, but the process is going on. So,
okay. So if I understand correctly, if you were to sanction Bidzina Ivanishvili, that would basically, wouldn't he find a way around the sanctions? Aren't the people in Sakartvelo creative enough to skirt them? You sanctioned Ivanishvili, but you have these companies, you have these people.
He probably will save some of his money, but globally, majority of his wealth is based on Russian connections. And I'm not very, in all of these properties and his capitals. You maybe remember that last year, one of his banks didn't return him money, which actually this bank had to return to Kyiv because of they understood the situation that if it may be sanctioned, this immediately influenced our government, and Mikhail Saakashvili has been moved from the prison to the hospital. So as soon as conversation and clear messages about Ivanishvili sanctions will start at the high level in European Union or in United States, it will free political situation.
Thank you for that. We still have her.
Yeah, we still have her, but yeah, the connection is breaking.
If you, I mean, perhaps yes. If I mean, this is a what if question and a hypothetical, but if and when Mikhail Saakashvili is freed, is that going to what's he going to do? What's going to happen in Sakartvelo? What would that be destabilizing factor, or would it be something that is more consolidating for the society?
First of all, it will save political situation in Georgia in terms of that in case he will not be freed from this hospital and he could die there, destroy the whole political situation here, and it's absolutely unpredictable mess will start here. It will be a big disaster, a political disaster for not only for Georgia but for the region itself. If he will be let free and led to the West to treat and to get this proper medical treatment, first of all, it will give an opportunity to political opposition to concentrate on political processes. Because right now we are somehow trapped in this situation. Because many things doesn't happen here, and political opposition, avoids some movements just because not to worse situation with the president. So this is a kind of chain of sanctions, freeing Saakashvili, and political process goes on. So because now everybody is just kind of trapped in this.
So it's my understanding then that the priority right now is Mikhail Saakashvili's health. It's not that he has, he's going to get into politics right away. He has to get help for his health.
First of all, his condition is so severe that he probably will need at least year and a half of treatment to get back to normal functioning, because he has 14 diagnoses, and his poisoning is proved by best ever American experts, and there is documented and presented to the court, and everything is recorded, so it's not nobody can argue with it. So he's poisoned, and he's trying. I mean, if things are now, there's no way to save him in the hospital.
The connection is terrible, but I think we've heard a few answers that are particularly important.
Could you hear me?
Are we still on air?
Yes.
I think so.
Pretty sure. Do you hear us, Oleksii?
Yeah, I can hear you, but yeah, the connection is breaking terribly. And can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes, I can.
I can hear you.
Yeah. All right. basically, I mean, the time is out. I think that we will try to come back to this conversation next Friday. But what is important that you keep on rolling, and Tbilisi is still a place where you really do a lot. You still do a lot on the streets, and you still can press on your government, and you still can perform some pretty solid political action. However, in my understanding, the division.
I think we
lost both of them.
Yep.
We lost both of them. So the Canada-Kyiv connection is better than the four-way.
Apparently. Now they're calling in.
There's a Skype.
Yeah.
There's a Skype. So yeah, the Free Mijo, he's another guy who can say, "I told you so," right? Because in 2008, when Georgia was invaded, it was important. Yushchenko, Gabuskaitik, Kwasniewski went there, stood by, but it kind of was it was recognized in like some policy circles, but it didn't really make much waves. There was a Val Kilmer movie made about it, but in the West, it didn't really penetrate the mass consciousness or the mainstream media narratives. But when Saakashvili gets out and he's gets better, obviously we just heard that his health is paramount. That his condition is so bad that he'll need about 1.5 years of treatment prior to doing anything else. And Godspeed his health, but he'll have a right to say, like, I told you so. Like you thought it was I was joking or kidding, or that we were somehow playing politics, or Putin had and obviously sounds like still has it in for him. And then the local, I guess, for lack of a better word, the collaborators with with Putin's regime that are enabling Russia to skirt sanctions. And that was another theme that we wanted to talk about. I don't know if Dmitro can hear us. Perhaps we would play the who, or go ahead.
Well, I just gonna, it's interesting what you're saying, because the first thing that the media did to discredit the Russia's invasion against Georgia was to say that Saakashvili had fired first, sort of pointing to that narrative that we heard from Christian Amanpour about it takes two to tango. And that sort of undermines it creates this very muddy interpretation or muddy understanding about what actually transpired. I'm more worried that someone like Ivanishvili might do a light version of Putin's passportization process, handing out Georgian passports, probably in some pseudo-legal way, not necessarily say the way the Russians do it in Ukrainian occupied territories, or the Hungarians, because sounds like he's going to need some support, and the influx of Russians into Georgia has been significant, to say the least. And so that's something that's going to undermine any kind of potential political maneuvering in the near future.
And that, of course, tells you a lot more about the Russians themselves, that instead of protesting the war, they just take off. It shows where their priorities are and what they think of their own country. But continuing on the theme of the sanctions, there was this 10th round of sanctions that was supposed to be voted on this week, and then the polls were saying, well, your synthetic rubber quotas are actually higher than Russia has ever, than European countries buy, and then Orban playing his game, with and counting on the Rosatom to build his nuclear reactors. But the issue of sanctions was well, today there was a press conference, and Ursula von der Leyen was there, the president of the European Council, the general secretary of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, Jens Stoltenberg, and the president of Estonia, Kaya. I'm going to mispronounce her name, so I'm just going to leave it there. But if we could cue that up, if we can cue up the sanctions video, Dmytro, then we can carry on.
We have our next one, Pradeep, please.
My name is Külli Kapper, and I come from the Postimees. I have one question to the President of the European Commission and one question to the Secretary General of the NATO. To the Commission, what measures will you take to prevent the circumvention of the European sanctions by the third countries?
So we are, in our sanction packages, we are increasing the measures to make sure that there are neither loopholes nor a circumvention. We have a sanctions envoy, David O'Sullivan, who is traveling to different third countries to reinforce the message that any kind of circumvention of sanctions will have consequences. For example, we have included in our sanctions packages the possibility to list persons or entities that are even from third countries that are circumventing the sanctions by exporting goods from or importing goods to third countries from the European Union and then bringing them to Russia. So here, increasingly, we are giving a very clear message. This will not be tolerated, and this will have consequences.
Yeah, so no talk of 10th round of sanctions anymore. The journalists aren't even asking about that. It looks like the priority is shifting to this ability to skirt the sanctions. And she mentioned the envoy, the special sanctions envoy, O'Sullivan, and who's was this week in Germany. He actually went to Germany to talk about these third parties that are helping Russia skirt sanctions, and Germany said, well, we're going to push for that in the 11th package of sanctions. And this whole business of doing these packages of sanctions and kind of, I don't know if the Europeans know what they're doing by, signaling to Russia and to these other, bad faith actors that want to make money, that this is what we're going to do. And that kind of allows for the, those with a criminal mind to prepare and think of how to skirt. So it's telling to me that David O'Sullivan went to Germany, right? And there's an FT article, Germany to crack down on companies evading Russian sanctions. Thank you, Germany. It's been a year, and now you're going to crack down. And then, and Germany's own economy ministry,
right?
Mystery,
yeah.
said, trade data showed a considerable amount of sanctions products were being exported from the EU and Germany to certain third countries and then exported further from there to Russia. And then in the article, they mention Armenia and Kyrgyzstan by name, and as well EBRD data. So the journalists looked at EBRD data and said, oh, look, Armenia and Kyrgyzstan are shipping more to Russia, and then Turkey's exports have also jumped. Georgia's not in this particular article, but we just heard that Georgia as a destination for that allows the Russians and their their minions and their millions to skirt the sanctions.
It's going to be a topic this entire year, I think, the notion that there are very large gaping holes in the sanctions regime. It almost reminds me of the PEP laws in the UK that they tried to use to stop political corruption. One of the criticisms was that the net has too large holes, so a lot of fish can get through. And to be fair, why I say it's going to be a big problem, Business Insider had a piece yesterday that the Prigozhin, the Wagner boss, used his mom's gas bill to pass money laundering checks. You know, in the UK is supposed to have one of the strongest sanctions regimes that, you know, and this is this is when there's a lack of leadership, and I think it's the missing component is sincerity amongst some of the European leaders, because I think sometimes they have a bit of a discordancy, having taken so much money from Russian oligarchs, that they are still acting themselves often as bad faith actors. I think it's going to be an issue for the foreseeable future. Hopefully, our diplomatic front can possibly use it to their advantage, because you know, not only is it a moral issue, it's a strategic issue at the end of the day, because it impacts their own domestic politics just as much as it impacts foreign affairs. I'm being told by the studio that Oleksii's internet collapsed, so it's up to us now to roll out the last few minutes of the second front. I think that
on the point, you know, so the Europeans and everybody who's used to playing by the rules and being transparent is actually, you know, transmitting and letting the sanctions busters know what's coming. And, you know, you can't help but think, you know, having grown up in Canada, when I went to Ukraine, you know, I don't know how to, or anywhere elsewhere in the former Soviet Union, not just Ukraine, but the level of the ability to scam, to skirt, to play the system. I mean, here, Bernie Madoff. Ooh, you know, Bernie Madoff in Ukraine would be like a low level, you know, like a beginner, a Ponzi scheme. Like, you know, if that is the measure for, you know, a great scammer or a great skirter here, you know, in the West, then, you know, in the former Soviet Union, he'd be just like a minor, you know, beginner, or maybe intermediate level fraudster. So, I mean, I don't know if the Western leaders are, I mean, they are aware of it, but they still, you know, we're going to transmit, we're going to tell you what we're doing beforehand, and you guys, then they know what's coming. So it's it seems to me like there could be a little bit more creativity in the way those sanctions are implemented or and revealed, you know.
I'll say this, though, to be fair to the EU, they managed to really create a united front politically, if not even militarily. I mean, one of the first decisions they made back last year was to provide military assistance, the bloc did, to Ukraine,
right,
and fast-tracking Ukraine's membership into the European Union is also, you know, a plus, a very big plus to changing the current dynamic. You know, that these guys are capable of skirting sanctions. It's not just a political issue. It's a systemic problem, which makes it a cultural problem, in my opinion. You know, that the banking systems can actually facilitate something like this. And, you know, their approach is that money doesn't stink, which is an often heard phrase in this part of the world, Well, it's time to sort of rethink that and understand that, yeah, some money actually does stink and it's got blood on it. And
Right.
maybe we're turning a corner. I know this is not related, but there's effort to do sort of green hedge funds, not hedge funds, but what do you call them? Wealth management things where companies like tobacco companies or the meat industry are taken off of people's investment portfolios, and they still manage to make money. So you're right. It comes down to some sort of form of more creative thinking and thinking outside of that box. But yeah, it's going to be. Go ahead.
Do you find it duplicitous though? And after we finish this duplicity discussion, maybe we can go on to the next and final one. But it's kind of duplicitous that these sanctions are saying, well, it's long term. It's going to have a long term impact. You're not going to see the impact of these sanctions right away. It's going to hurt Russia in the long term. Then those same people are saying, oh no, we don't want Russia to fall apart. We don't want Russia. Russia has to stay together. Right. So it's like you're saying, well, wait for, the sanctions are going to hurt Russia, but not right now, sometime in the future. Yet that doesn't actually jive with this idea of also keeping Russia together, because just for keeping Russia's together sake, because you don't have, again, lacking the creativity to be able to, come up with a vision or a plan of what that could look like. So that there's a duplicity there. Am I reading it right or wrong?
No, I actually, to be honest, I never really actually looked at it that way, and that's an interesting way of looking at it. That you can't really see. There's a failure to understand that the way empires work, unfortunately. It's actually a good opportunity to talk about this guy, right? Janusz Bogajski's book, right?
Right.
You can't have it both ways. That we just translated into Ukrainian. If anyone's interested in getting in Ukraine, there's almost a misunderstanding of historical processes, and I'm not going to say that I understand all of them by any stretch of the imagination, but there's this weird sense that they want to maintain the status quo, but they want to support Ukraine's effort at liberating and its occupied territories and reestablishing sovereignty. Well, there's consequences to both of those efforts. You can't support both of them. If you support Ukraine's effort, you have to recognize that one of the consequences is going to be a very serious challenge to Russia to maintain itself in its current form. The process of decolonization, and this is where we need someone from, it'd be great to get someone from Ghana or any of the other African countries that have gone through the process of decolonization for their perspective, because other than this part of the world, I think the African continent has a lot to offer to this kind of conversation about the end of empires. So I'm not so sure that it's duplicitous in as much as it's just high concentrations of stupidity, and people aren't quite understanding where the world is going. And it's probably because we're living within, when you're in the eye of the storm, you don't know that you're actually in for a world of hurt. So maybe there's something to that they are being duplicitous, but I don't think it's hard to say. It really is hard to say. There's certainly a lack of understanding about the way things work. And that's something that is going to need to be remedied by reading, educating ourselves, watching UMN, independent media.
Right, and reading the book Failed State, A Guide to Russia's Rupture by Janusz Bugajski, which is available for free download at the Jamestown Foundation website. We did an interview with Janusz a little bit earlier in the year about his book. It's a fascinating read. Published in January 21, or rather January 22, about a month before the full-scale escalation of Russia's genocidal invasion of Ukraine. And if we, to continue on the theme of duplicity, let's look if we can ask the studio and Dmytro to queue up the video about who EU.
China will soon put forward a proposal for political settlement of Russia-Ukraine conflict. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba said on Tuesday that China's top diplomat Wang Yi has shared the main points of the peace plan, and once the whole text is received, Ukraine will study the details. As a journalist, I want to remind Russia and Ukraine that both sides must have the willingness to make compromise if they want to talk about peace at this moment. China is one of the third-party countries that wishes for peace with the most sincerity. For Ukraine, China is trustworthy. The U.S., which supports Kyiv to continue the war, is very important to Ukraine. But the U.S.'s strategic purpose is to weaken Russia through Ukraine. In essence, the U.S. is also taking advantage of Ukraine. Therefore, Ukraine must have the ability and wisdom to play games with the U.S., and it needs to be able to control its own fate. China's peace proposal provides Ukraine an opportunity to expand its space for strategic autonomy rather than being kidnapped by the US. Europe should also pay attention to the peace proposal. The logic is the same. To the US, Europe is like a larger size Ukraine, and it also needs to expand its own strategic autonomy.
We have first ready there, please.
Yes, thank you, Tarmo Maiberg, for public broadcasting. Questions to all of you, actually. About China's position paper about Ukraine, and it has 12 points. I would like to know, do you find it credible, especially as the China abstained United Nations vote yesterday about Ukraine? And also, before the war started, US shared intelligent info about Russia's troops and preparation. So, has United States shared any info about its claim made by Mr. Blinken that China is considering giving weapons to Russia? Thank you.
Yeah, so, indeed, the Chinese paper, I think you have to see the principles they shared. It's not a peace plan, but principles that they shared. You have to see them against a specific backdrop, and that is the backdrop that China has taken side by signing, for example, an unlimited friendship right before the invasion, Russia's invasion in Ukraine started. So we will look at the principles, of course, but we will look at them against the backdrop that China has taken sides.
On the question of supplies of military support from China to Russia, we have not seen any actual delivery of lethal aid. But what we have seen are signs and indications that China may be planning and considering to supply military aid to Russia. And China should not do that, because that will be to support an illegal war or aggression, breaching international law and violating the UN Charter. And China is a member of the UN Security Council, and they have a particular responsibility to protect the UN Charter, and this is a war aggression violating exactly that charter. Then on the proposals and the points presented by China. So first of all, China doesn't have much credibility because they have not been able to condemn the illegal invasion of Ukraine. And they also signed, just days before the invasion, an agreement between President Xi and President Putin on limitless partnership with Russia. So I think what we see now in Ukraine is that President Putin is not preparing for war. He is preparing for the exact opposite, for more war, for more new offensives. And therefore, most likely, this war at some stage will end at the negotiating table. But if we want a peaceful solution, we need to also realize that what happens around that negotiating table is totally dependent on the strength and the situation on the battlefield. So meaning that if we want a peaceful negotiated solution where Ukraine prevails as a sovereign independent nation, then we need to support Ukraine militarily now. Because that's the only way to create the conditions where President Putin realizes that he will not win on the battlefield. He has to sit down and accept Ukraine as an independent sovereign nation in Europe. So military support today is the way to achieve a peaceful agreement tomorrow.
Yes, actually, I have nothing really to add because all was said. UN Charter is also something that China is and should be respecting, and it says the principles of territorial integrity and also the right to defend one's country and sovereignty. So if they are providing military aid to aggressor, then they go against this UN Charter, and that is dangerous to the peace of the world in general. Thank you.
So that was, I should have set that up a little bit more, teed it up to explain what we just saw. So the first guy was Eugene. He's a commentator at Global Times, an English language organ of the Communist Party of China. He is one of the wolf warriors, as they're known, the journalists, the Chinese journalists that go out there and, they're like wolves in their defense of the any criticism of the Chinese Communist Party. And you can see from his talk that it's a game for them. He calls it a game. He tells Ukraine to play a game. Like that's where this spokesperson representing the Chinese Communist Party is coming from. People are dying. Oh, play a game, Ukraine. You should learn how to play a game. Like, disgusting. I don't know if they realize or they care about how tone deaf something like that is. And then the second video was the Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, Kaja Kallas, the prime minister of Estonia. She was there today because Estonia is celebrating its Independence Day. Happy Independence Day, Estonia. And then Jens Stoltenberg, the General Secretary of NATO, who said, or rather Ursula von der Leyen said, you know what, this isn't a peace plan. This is just like a collection of principles. And then according to my scorecard, out of those 12 principles that China floated in their game, is only 2 could be construed as kind of conceding or seeing Ukraine's point of view. The other ones are pro-Russian, or by definition they're pro-Russian because they're not pro-Ukrainian in this. So that, in a nutshell, were the reactions. What do you think?
Well, I think China's playing a game, but their game is really directed against Russia. They're doing everything to create a weaker Russia. And what I don't understand is how the Russians are falling for it. Russia is going to emerge from this significantly weaker than it did in 2020. Let's just go back to 2021. And I think that China may be playing a very, not a 2 or 3 year plan, but a 5 to 10 year plan. If anything, I think that they may want to call it a peace plan, but it's not. I think that it's a bit of a smokescreen to continue. I think that they are expressing an interest that the war continues so that Russia gets even weaker, without saying it that way. Which, for me, I don't know if you meant to do this on purpose, but putting Estonia in there is really almost, it's very prescient, because it was Lithuania a couple of years, well, side by side with the Chinese, because it was Lithuania that a couple of years ago broke off their consular or open consular an office in Taiwan. And they've been really punching above their weight, as they say, vis-a-vis China. And not much negative has happened. Again, right, there's this projection of fear in the minds of many European leaders that China is big. But when it comes down to the reality, they're suffering hugely from COVID. They've lied about their population from the by several hundred million, I think it was. I don't think China is willing to admit it, but I think China is not an emerging power. I think they're actually on decline, the same way that Russia is, because although we talk about Russia being the last empire, China too has has occupied a lot of territory, and a lot of the indigenous peoples are suffering as a result. So yeah, it's going to be really interesting in the next couple of days, in the next couple of years, to see how this all plays out. What's interesting is that Zelensky suggested that he would like to meet with Xi Jinping today in his press conference after someone asked about the peace plan, and he hadn't seen it yet, and he said he'd be happy to meet and wants to meet with Xi Jinping about this. And that's really interesting, because a lot of these think tanks do the game theory, and I took part in one a couple of years ago at Johns Hopkins, and I was on the Team Ukraine. And as we were losing, I think we're the next Eter has started. So in any event, we can get back to that later. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. I think that we're going to try and clean this up a bit. We'll get a bit more structured as we move forward. But don't forget to like and subscribe to UMN to get notified of more English language content.
Glory to Ukraine.
Slava Ukraini, Heroям Slava.
Glory to the heroes.